Daily Playbook fans. Chauvin and I are back for another episode. We are previewing Week 16. This could be the fantasy finals for some of your leagues. For some leagues, it's the semifinals. So, regardless, it's pretty important week. And if there's one thing that is going to get in the way of you possibly winning your fantasy championship or winning your fantasy matchup this week, it sounds like it's going to be the weather, because there is a horrible, horrible cold front across like the entire U.S. basically. And so a lot of games are going to have some weather implications that, you and I talked about this last week, Shovit. You're looking at guys who are studs, and I always say start your studs, but some of these situations almost make you want to second guess if you should start your stud or not. So
Yeah.
there's going to be a lot of weather related implications for fantasy this week, and I wouldn't be surprised if we come out of this weekend, having seen one of the wilder weekends of football, just because of how much wind is on the forecast for pretty much every single football game.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's like you definitely have to think about your studs, and then some of these matchups with the wind being the way they are, we'll go through them. I know you're going to be the weatherman today, but I think the defenses are definitely in play here for some of these teams that you're kind of on borderline where I don't know if I should start them. Well, the weather's on their favor for you to start, and the matchups are decent enough. But we'll go through them and talk about that.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, with the weather and the wind, it's going to come into a factor that there's going to be more running, less maybe explosive plays. Play calling is going to be a little bit more predictable. So lower scoring affairs bode well for starting defenses in fantasy, right? Even if you're not getting turnovers and stuff, just lack of yards, lack of points is going to go a long way. And you're going to be scraping and clawing for points this week. So I think, you're going to have really, really tough decisions to make that can ultimately dictate the outcome of your matchup. So, like you said, we'll talk all about it. We have so much to go through, so we'll try to do our best to run through this so we can catch the kickoff of Thursday Night Football, which is the Jags and Jets. But without further ado, Shove It, let's kick things off with Water Cooler Talk. You mentioned it, man. I'm going to do my best weatherman impersonation here. We have so many games, and before we even talk about the games themselves, I just want to talk about the weather in a lot of these games, because that's going to dictate, again, a lot of the choices that you make. And you may be starting lesser players just because they're playing in a dome versus some of these guys that are going to be having to play in like 20, 25 mile an hour winds. So real quickly, I'm going to run through some of the games that have weather is going to be a factor. And then obviously we'll dive deeper into the game themselves. Jags Jets, they play in an hour here. It looks like it's going to be about 45 degrees. So it's not super cold, but rain is on the forecast here in New York. I would know, I'm right here. I live here, and there's about 15 plus mile an hour winds. So I think I was trying to do some digging on how much weather really impacts fantasy football, and at like what degree, or like how much rain or how much wind does it start to actually play a factor. And a lot of what I saw is once you hit north of 10 mile an hour winds, that really, really dictates the passing game, the kicking game. And so the passing game obviously impacts the receivers, and the receiving game, the tight ends, obviously pass catching running backs. So a lot is at stake here when you have 10 plus mile an hour winds. Jags Jets, 15 mile an hour winds. It's not going to be super cold, but there is going to be precipitation, and that wind is going to play a factor in the passing game. A couple other games real quickly. Let's run through them. Bills Bears. It's going to be 5 degrees in Chicago and 20 plus mile an hour winds. So we already know the Bears don't have a formidable passing game, but the Bills do. That is going to be something we'll talk more about. Saints Browns, 7 degrees and 25 mile an hour winds. So in Cleveland, it is not going to be a pleasant time if you are a pass catcher or a pass thrower. Titans and Texans in Tennessee. Nashville's getting 13-degree temperatures and 10 plus mile an hour winds. The Chiefs are hosting the Seahawks in Kansas City. It's going to be 7 degrees, and there's going to be 13 plus mile an hour winds there. Bengals Patriots getting 13 plus mile an hour winds. Lions Panthers getting 11. Falcons Ravens getting 15, and Raiders Steelers getting 15. That is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 games this week that have 11 plus mile an hour winds on the forecast. And outside of the Jags Jets tonight, there isn't a temperature that's above freezing in those games. So
Dude, that is
guys
crazy.
are going to be scared to tackle people, man. I mean, if there's one thing you can't stand, probably it's hitting people in the cold. And
Yeah.
then on top of that, it's going to be windy. The wind chill is probably going to be worse than what the actual temperature dictates. So it is going to be a cold, it's going to be a wet, and it's going to be a windy weekend in the NFL.
Yeah, one thing I want to add is like it's like 11 degrees. It was snowing earlier in Texas, in Dallas, Texas, this morning. So I went out there taking my dogs out, and I didn't have any gloves, and it was so cold. And like you have to feel for these quarterbacks that are throwing out there. But it's the Steelers. Kenny Pickett wears gloves when he throws. So hey, maybe that's one of those weather instances that doesn't.
Yeah.
Effective quarterback.
He's weatherproof. He's got the gloves. So no, that's a great point. I mean, receivers wear gloves too, but every once in a while you get those pass catchers or those old school guys that don't wear gloves, and I'm like, do you contemplate wearing gloves in weeks like this, because it is damn cold?
Right.
How are you having rockets thrown to your hands when your hands like have no gloves in the freezing cold? I can't even play catch outside with not tackle football in the cold. I can't imagine what these guys are going to go through. So
Right.
again, all of those games are going to have tremendous fantasy implications just due to the fact that the weather is not going to be favorable. Shove it. Let's run real quickly through the injury report I have as of, as late as Thursday. A lot of the games are on Saturday. So this injury report should be as close to what is finalized as it would be if it was on Sunday and we were putting this out tomorrow. So players that are officially out, some of these are obvious, but Jalen Hurts is not going to play this week. Saints receivers, Chris Olave is out. Jarvis Landry is out. Lamar Jackson, another week, he is not going to play. Titans quarterback Ryan Tannehill is also out. Seahawks receiver Tyler Lockett not going to play, and 49ers receiver Deebo Samuel is also out. There are a handful of guys that are questionable that may have some fantasy implications. Jeff Wilson left last game at halftime, I believe, with like a rib injury. I think it was a rib injury, but he is questionable this week. Tyler Huntley, who's backing up Ryan Tannehill, or I'm sorry, who's backing up Lamar Jackson, is also questionable. It does look like he's going to play, though. He's been on the injury report on and off, but I don't think they're going to have to pivot to the third stringer. Broncos got Cortland Sutton back at practice. He is listed as questionable. Bengals got their tight end Hayden Hurst back, limited practice. He is questionable. And Trevor Lawrence has a questionable designation, but he plays tonight, and he is expected to play. Now, the players that have already been designated ready to play, Zonovan Knight plays in an hour. He is going to go ahead and play, and James Robinson is inactive. So got to feel good if you're a Zonovan Knight owner, despite the fact that he had an injury report. I know Michael Carter is there, but regardless, you would have thought that if there was any concern about his health, there's no reason James Robinson would have been inactive. So the fact that he's inactive, they have to feel good about Knight. Sammy Watkins got cut, and then the Ravens picked him back up, and he is going to play because they have nobody else to throw the football to. Duvernay is out now as well, so Sammy Watkins is going to be active. Probably not going to take him a ton of time to learn the offense because he's already in that offense not too long ago. The Bears did officially designate Khalil Herbert to return from the IR. That's going to be a big windy game as well. So I expect both running backs to be utilized heavily in that matchup. Washington has officially activated Chase Young. We talked about their defense. Their pass rush has been really, really good despite nothing from Young, who's been hurt all year, and now he's officially back. So that defense is on the up and up, so going to generate a lot of pressure. Nick Chubb is good to go. That's great for them because, again, I just talked about that weather there. They're going to have to run the football a ton, and no better person to give the ball to than Nick Chubb. Tyler Lockett is out, so it was just going to be DK Metcalf. Marquise Goodwin was injured, but he is officially expected to play. That is a guy that I think we'll talk a little bit more about during the matchup, but a really nice matchup there for him. And with Lockett out, I think he can step right in and be a serviceable fantasy replacement. Same game as well, Ken Walker is officially going to play as well. So I think if you were a Ken Walker owner, you feel good about that. In the playoffs, he is going to be ready to go. Those are all the injury reports that I have. That is up to the minute as of 7:30 here on Thursday. Anything else that comes out, the couple of games that are on Sunday, or any last minute injury updates for Saturday, follow us on Twitter at OnlyPlaybook. Make sure you turn your notifications on so we will keep you updated there. Any other injury news that maybe I may have missed that you came across?
No, I think that's pretty good. Yeah. Got it all.
Okay, perfect. That's it. Great. Let's jump into it. Shove it with the rundown. Like I mentioned, most of the games this week are on Christmas Eve on Saturday. So first game on the board is the Bills traveling to Chicago to take on the Bears. I already talked about the weather here. 20 plus mile an hour winds. Buffalo's favored by 8 points on the road, over under sitting at 40.5. Again, you have to, whether you want to believe it or not, you have to factor in the wind into your decision making. Stephon Diggs already didn't have that great of a game last week when the weather wasn't good for Buffalo when they played, and now this week it's going to be that much worse. Obviously, Josh Allen, Justin Fields, going to be great for them because they are quarterbacks that can run the football. Obviously, Fields is a run first quarterback, so they should have a field day. I don't have any concerns with starting either of those quarterbacks. Running game. This is important here. I mean, I don't know how these teams are going to handle it. The Bears already don't pass the football often. So I'm expecting the Bears to really we're going to see a lot of third down running. Like, I think we're going to see Montgomery utilized quite a bit. Herbert's off the IR. So, between the two of those guys and Fields, I wouldn't be surprised if the Bears run the football 50 plus times this game. So, I still like Monty over Herbert, but this isn't the worst situation in the world where if you're desperate, you're throwing in Herbert as a flex, because I think there are going to be carries to be had regardless, because teams are going to want to run the football. Same situation on the other side of it. Singletary still is the guy, in my opinion, over Cook. But again, if they're going to limit throwing the football to limit the wind becoming a factor, I think Singletary and Cook have the opportunity to have nice days. Stephon Diggs is really the only pass catcher on either side of the football field that you're like, man, I feel really uncomfortable if I have to bench this guy. So I think in all reality, he's a first round draft pick. You're probably not going to bench him in the playoffs. But if you decide to do so, I would not fault you if you took, the weather into account. But there's not going to be a lot of pivoting options, because like 75% of these games are going to be, having bad weather, right? So with that being said, because there's not a ton of pivot options, I think you still have to start Stephon Diggs and just kind of, take what you get there. And then, no other receivers. Davis, absolutely don't start him. McKenzie, don't start him. Beasley, don't even think about it. Dawson Knox has come into his own the last couple of weeks. And I think the Bills offense is trying to utilize their tight ends a little bit more, just to spread the offense out a little bit more. And Knox has been kind of the benefactor of that. I think in a game where they're going to have limited throwing options, a lot of play action, a lot of short passes, that could bode well for the tight ends. So I don't mind Dawson Knox or Cole Kmet, for that matter of fact, if you're really desperate in starting a tight end in this game. But again, tight ends are such a crapshoot that, you really don't know what you're going to get unless you have Travis Kelce. So why risk it with a guy in a game where there is this much wind? So if you can, I pivot elsewhere. But out of the pass catchers on both sides of the ball, I think Diggs is the only guy you probably have to start despite the weather. But Allen and Fields, I expect to have great games. Running game should be a big factor. 20-mile-an-hour winds, it's going to be a shit show. I still think Bills are going to win this game, but because the Bears can run the football successfully, like I said, they had a good chance to cover against Philadelphia last week because they run the ball well. Similar situation here, barring some turnovers and things like that. I think the Bears can do enough to keep this game inside of 8 points, but I still expect Buffalo to win this game.
Yeah, man. Having Field scares me because we talked about the weather, and if he gets hit really hard, I worry that he's going to be injured. But
Yeah.
you just put him out there, and hopefully he doesn't get injured.
Yep.
All right, next up, we have the Saints traveling to Cleveland to face the Browns. Cleveland is favored by 3 points. Over under really low, 32 points. And this is the game that we talked about where there's 25 plus miles per hour wind, which,
Yeah.
man, like when you throw
That's
the ball,
insanity. Yeah.
you would think that the trajectory of the ball is kind of being affected by that as well. Playoff,
Absolutely.
right? Playoff hopes alive for both of these teams still very slim, but they're not out of it just quite yet. Fantasy wise, Kamara is a guy that if you are in the fantasy, playoffs, you're still going to start him because of the matchup. Since Week 10, Cleveland is 26th in rushing yards per game as far as defense goes, 30th in explosive run rate allowed. The thing that's hurting Kamara is touchdowns, but with this wind factor and the defense, hopefully Kamara gets into the end zone and gets you the fantasy points you need. Olave is out, so Rashid Shaheed will get the start. The Browns are 29th in pass DVOA against deep passes, and that's kind of what Shaheed banks off of, right? Those deep throws. So he is a person that, if you have Olave, maybe you start. I think he's like wide receiver 2, 3, maybe. But if you have no other options, consider Shaheed. But very low.
Yeah, with the wind, are they going to throw the ball deep, right?
That's
If
true.
that's really
That's
what
true.
he's used for, that's the one thing that scares me for guys who are, boom or bust, similar with like Gabe Davis in the prior game.
Actually, yeah, that's a good point. So, yeah, take all that into account whenever you decide you need someone else to step up to that Olave spot. For the Browns, Deshaun Watson, you're still not going to start him. I don't think. The Saints defense, not the best, but this doesn't put them in a favorable matchup. Watson's not in a favorable matchup against the Saints. Nick Chubb is expected to play Saturday, so he didn't play practice on Tuesday. He was questionable, but I think he is going to play on Saturday, so he's a start. Amari Cooper, Donovan Peoples-Jones, these are all guys that you start if weather's not a factor here. But that's like in 6 games of the league, you've got a weather situation. So I think you definitely have to see if you have better options. But otherwise, these guys are still starts, in my opinion. And then lastly, because of the weather, the Cleveland defense, I think, is definitely going to be a good start here. I don't trust the red rifle at all. I don't trust the Saints offense. And with Olave being out and the weather being a factor, I think the Cleveland defense is a nice position to get a start this week.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you on all of that. The one dark horse here, because of the weather and because I expect run heavy, is Taysom Hill. Taysom Hill is the tight. He's in it. He gets the tight
Mm,
end designation,
good point.
and they're going to run the football. Like, I mean, they're going to be forced to run the football. They don't have a choice, right? And Kamara, despite he's getting older, he's not seeing the workload that he's been accustomed to seeing. Ingram, I think he's still there. He's been hobbled and not. I can't remember if he's even hurt. But regardless, this is the type of game that sets up Taysom Hill to have like 8 to 10 touches or carries, and maybe even 1 or 2 throws. So this isn't the worst matchup to deploy Taysom Hill because of the wind. So this is the one matchup where I'm like, okay, this weather actually dictates the possibility that Taysom Hill is getting rushing yards for a tight end, which is going to be more valuable than a lot of these tight ends trying to pass or catch passes in these windy environments.
I agree, and I think because it's a tight end position, and we've talked about how there's not that many tight ends out there that you can consider starting on a week to week basis. Taysom Hill is definitely not a bad play here, where there is certainly a boom opportunity every week. Taysom Hill is out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and this should go without saying, do not start either of these kickers. Like, I don't care if they have 20 plus points, like some miraculous way, but kickers should be the number one, factor for wind. Like we saw Justin Tucker last week in 13-mile-an-hour winds, miss a 50-yarder, get one blocked. And I don't know if a lot of that had to do with wind only, but there were other variables. But still, 25-mile-an-hour winds is no joke. Like you're literally having to kick the football in a different direction than you would if there was no wind, right? You're like having to play the wind, and that's not a recipe for success if you're starting a kicker in the playoffs. So if you can, stay away from Will Lutz and Cade York. Let's take it to Tennessee, where the Titans are hosting the Texans and Derrick Henry is salivating. Why? Because he is looking to go 5 games in a row against Houston where he surpassed 200 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns. The last 4 times he's played them, 200 plus yards, at least 2 touchdowns. This guy has been a monster against Houston. So this is going to be his 5th attempt at doing so. There is going to be some wind in this game as well. It's going to be cold. I talked about it, 10 plus mile an hour winds, and Ryan Tannehill is not playing. So they are going to try to run the ball, whether they like it or not, because Malik Willis, in the last game they played where they played against Houston, I think Malik Willis started that game too, and he only had like 10 pass attempts. So regardless, Derrick Henry is, he's got one of the premier matchups this week. So if you're playing against him, I feel bad for you. If you have him, it's a great week. And, with all that being said, I'm one of the guys that had Jalen Hurts go down, right? So I've been toying with a lot of fantasy quarterbacks in free agent or in the waiver wire, and call me absolutely crazy, but Houston, at this point, when you've had a running back go for 202 against you 4 games in a row, and now you're playing in a cold ass environment where there's going to be wind, like I have to assume that the boxes are going to be 9 in the box at like all times. Like they're going to force Malik Willis to throw the football, right? But here's the thing. If there's 9 in the box and they're all ganging up towards Derrick Henry, it takes one read option where Malik Willis keeps the football and that dude is gone for 70 yards. So call me crazy. I don't think there should be some options that are better than Malik Willis, but I would not be surprised if because of Malik Willis's legs and the fact that Houston they just cannot let Derrick Henry kill them again. Like it would seem like they were trying to make no adjustments if this happened. So for the sake of that, like for Lovie Smith's sanity, I got to believe that they're going to be like, fuck this. We cannot let this happen. And I think that's why Malik Willis is going to get a decent amount of fantasy points scrambling. And I think there's a chance in the red zone, all eyes are on Derrick Henry. Malik Willis will keep one and run it into the end zone. So don't be surprised if Malik Willis has 15 plus fantasy points this week. But with that being said, he's not a surefire start. I don't start any of the pass catchers there. I love Chigakonkwa, but I do not start him with Malik Willis at the helm. So Henry is the only surefire play. On the other side, I mean, there's nobody, right? Royce Freeman's interesting because it's going to be a run-heavy game, and he's the guy that got a lot of the carries last week. Rex Burkhead continues to be like only the pass-catching down guy. Obviously, Pierce is out. The one surprise is Brandon Cooks is going to play, but he's playing in a week where I don't think the matchup is favorable. It's cold, it's windy, and again, there's still a two-headed quarterback monster here with Driscoll and Davis Mills. So I don't like anybody in this game besides Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry is mighty obvious as a start. And if you're that desperate, if you're getting cute, if you think you've got your matchup locked up and you just want to try something, throw Malik Willis in there and see what happens.
Yeah, that. Well, I hope for the Titans' sake that's gonna work out for them. Because if you put 9 guys on the box, I don't know if Derrick Henry can get through that, or maybe he can. It is Derrick Henry at the end of the day. All right, that takes us to Seahawks at the Chiefs. Kansas City is favored by 10 points. Over under is at 49.5. And another windy game, 13 plus miles per hour wind in effect in this game. For the Seahawks, Geno Smith is in a nice bounce back opportunity to play against the Chiefs defense, who are allowing 30th in fantasy points per game to quarterbacks. So I like Geno Smith's bounce back abilities here in this game. Kenneth Walker is a guy you're probably going to start as well. DK Metcalf and then Marquise Goodwin. With Lockett ruled out, he is in a nice position to get the start and take over Lockett's the things that he's been doing all of this year. Goodwin could fill that role very well. On the Chiefs side, Patrick Mahomes, definitely starting him. Kelsey, and then Juju, if you have to start him, I think he had like 22 points, fantasy points last week. He is the receiver that I would consider starting out of the other receivers that they have. But Juju is a nice spot start if you need him. And then on the running back side, McKinnon and Pacheco, I think you can't go wrong with either one of these guys. McKinnon's having a solid 2-3 fantasy weeks ever since he's been back from injury, giving you the passing catches and yards and touchdowns that you need. And then Pacheco's just there for the he's able to run the ball really well. He just looks like a true running back. So for that reason, against the Seahawks rush defense, which is not very good, I think that either one of these guys could be a nice start for you.
Yeah, I mean, Pacheco's the running back, right? So if they can control this game and they're running, it's a run heavy scheme, and that's just the game script. It's all Pacheco. McKinnon is usually the guy that comes in on third downs or when they're down, sometimes mostly in the red zone too, at times to catch passes. So there's a world where both these guys thrive because, like you said, Seattle's defense, outside of like a 4-week stretch where I thought they turned it around, they've been atrocious. Like they've been just so bad they can't stop anybody. So and I do like the Marquise Goodwin start if because Lockett is ruled out. Despite the weather, despite it being windy in this game as well and cold, the Seahawks are going to have to put up points because they're going to give up points. And the Chiefs at home, they're going to score. So the Chiefs, just by sheer game script, are going to be playing from behind. They're going to have to throw the football. And I think that bodes well for Goodwin. Minnesota, where it's mighty cold, 12 below freezing, but who cares because they have a dome. They are hosting the New York Giants. Vikings favored by 4 points, over under 48. The Minnesota Vikings are still slim hopes to catch Philadelphia for the first spot and the first round bye. Minnesota would have to win out, and I think Philly would have to lose out. Obviously, that becomes a little bit more realistic with Hurts being injured, but still probably not attainable. And the Giants over here are clinging to a playoff spot. This could be a potential first round matchup as well. If the Vikings get the 2 seed, the Giants would have to be the 7 seed. I think right now they're the 6 seed, but there is a chance the Vikings are only 1 game ahead of the 49ers. The 49ers could jump the Vikings. They could be the 3 seed. And then at that point, they would play the Giants. So this could be a future matchup in the playoffs. The Vikings defense is just bad. I think we all know this. The good thing is they made a ton of adjustments in the second half of last week. Let's see if that's something that they're adjusting, from game on, right? From the first snap and not waiting till they're getting gashed for 30 to 33 points at the half. But with all that being said, even if they, change a lot of things up, the personnel is not as great. And Ed Donatel just, quite frankly, there's only so much he can do. He can make this defense bend, don't break. He can make them be opportunistic. But the reality is the yards are still going to be given up. And that's why Daniel Jones, to me, is a great streaming option, especially with Hurts hurt, Kyler hurt, Lamar hurt, and a lot of these quarterbacks playing in really, really shitty, windy situations. This is a dome. This is indoors. The Giants are still fighting for a playoff spot, and the Vikings defense is trash. So Daniel Jones, to me, has a great option here as a streaming quarterback. Saquon Barkley, obviously plug him in. The wide receivers for the Giants have been tough. It's been tough to gauge who is the true number one. It was Slayton for a couple weeks. We saw glimpses of Isaiah Hodgins and Richie James. Richie James is their slot guy. He's quick. He catches some passes. So between the three of those guys, I'm going to be completely honest with you. Like the last several weeks, I went back through the data, and there's really not a clear cut one. I mean, it was Slayton for a handful of games, but after that, it's been really, really sporadic. So I have no way of knowing who's going to be the guy. I wish I could tell you, but I think there is a really good chance that one or two of these guys is going to have a great game. Because again, who are they playing? They're playing the Minnesota Vikings. On the Vikings side, Dalvin Cook, obviously you play him. Justin Jefferson, obviously play him. TJ Hawkinson, you obviously play him. Kirk Cousins is a nice streaming option at home here as well after that big game. I think, despite how crazy of a game KJ Osborne had last week, it's the first week that he had over 50 yards receiving since like week 3. So temper your expectations. It was an anomaly game. It was the greatest comeback in history. They needed to throw the football for like the entirety of the second half. So I'd still wait to see more consistency from KJ before throwing him into the lineup. But aside from that, Graham Gano, another great kicking option if you're pivoting away from the windy games. Indoors, he's been really, really good. Even Greg Joseph, he's been inconsistent, but it's indoors. It's a game where I expect the ball to be moved on both sides. So look for this game to have one of the higher scoring affairs and a lot better fantasy production versus the other games that are outside and windy as hell.
Awesome. All right, from the Dome to New England. So Cincinnati Bengals are playing New England Patriots. The Bengals are favored by 3 points. Over under sitting at 41.5 here. Wind at over 13 miles per hour in this game. So for the Bengals and Patriots both, I think that they all players that are going to be on the field have tough matchups as far as fantasy goes. Burrow is playing against a Patriots defense that is stringent, is tough, but he is the QB number 4. So therefore, you're still going to start Joe Burrow, obviously. Mixon is playing a Pats defense that's 4th in rushing yards per game allowed. So that's a tough matchup, but just for sheer volume, you're starting Mixon as well. And Chase and Higgins, I think both do still get the start, even with the great secondary that the Patriots have. Those two guys are studs on this team, so they still warrant a start. Tyler Boyd, I would shy away from. He's probably the wide receiver 3, not only the wide receiver 3 on this team, but maybe on your fantasy team as well. So, I mean, if you need that extra flex spot, you don't have anyone else, I guess you would start Boyd. But he's a guy that, expect wide receiver 3 numbers, definitely. And on the Patriots side, again, this is a tough Bengals defense that's kind of showed up since week 10 of this year. So Stevenson, I think he still warrants a start because of the fact that he's a volume-based running back. He had 21 touches last game. He's on the field a lot, and he's definitely going to be there as the RB1 for the Patriots. And with the wind factor again, and just the way the Patriots utilize him, I think Stevenson definitely still gets a start in this game.
Yeah, he's an automatic start, man. He had a phenomenal game last week. Damian Harris still hasn't come off the injury report, so there's really no reason to pivot away from him. But yeah, this is another game. I mean, Nick Folk had been phenomenal. He'd been my guy for fantasy kicking, and another windy matchup in Foxborough. I'm gonna try to pivot. I mean, the reality is you're not going to be able to pivot away from everybody because more games have wind this week than not. But if you can, you just try to pivot away because that at least makes you feel better about your decision making if the results follow, right? If Nick Folk has a great game and you didn't start him, you shouldn't feel as bad. I mean, it was incredibly windy. It's super cold. It's not ideal kicking situation, but if he does have a good game or if he ends up having a bad game and you benched him, you're going to feel great because you did the work. You realize that the weather impacts kicking a lot.
See, one thing I want to add to that is like with Nick Folk though, I feel like because a lot of teams out there right now, if you have the kicker, it's probably in a windy situation. So like you're almost leveling the playing field a little bit. And if you can't go out and grab anyone, and you have to drop someone important on your team, like Nick Folk's not the most terrible start, just because
No.
yeah, it's the
Yeah.
Patriots and all of that.
Yeah, not at all. He's had a great kicking year. I mean, the Bengals defense is good, right? So I don't know how much ball movement or movement the
True.
Patriots offense is going to get. And again, in this wind, do I think they're going to try to attempt 50-yard field goals? Probably not. So if I can pivot away from Nick Folk and I can pick up either kicker, which Greg Joseph for the Vikings should probably be a free agent. And Graham Gano, I've seen in a lot of free agencies as well. The game right before this, two kickers who are serviceable playing in a dome. I expect ball movement there. I would pivot to either one of those guys over Nick Folk this week.
That's a good point. Yep.
The Carolina Panthers are hosting the Detroit Lions, who are on the rise. Detroit on the road, favored by 2.5 points, over under sitting at 43.5. Another cold game on the East Coast in Carolina, 11-mile-an-hour winds plus for the whole game. Both teams' playoff hopes are still alive. The Lions have shut down opposing running backs, and Deontay Foreman got shut down by the Steelers last week. So there's no reason to believe that the Lions defense, who's been phenomenal, is going to let this guy run. So Deontay Foreman, in my opinion, is somebody you bench this week. Chuba Hubbard, obviously the same. DJ Moore continues to lure you in, man. Just when you write him off, he comes crawling back, and he's got a great matchup. Detroit's run defense has been phenomenal, but their pass defense is atrocious, right? So really, really advantageous to the quarterbacks and the receivers, but the quarterback is Sam Darnold and the receiver's DJ Moore. And no slight on DJ Moore. I think he's a great receiver, but his situation has never been fantastic, and this is similar. So, I mean, if you really want to roll the dice, if you're desperate, if Daniel Jones isn't in the waivers, if Russell Wilson isn't in waivers, if Darnold is there and your options are like Darnold and the bottom of the barrel, like Malik Willis and those guys, then, maybe you roll the dice with Darnold simply because you're playing the matchup and Darnold can scramble with his legs. But outside of that, on the other side, Goff, in my opinion, has done enough to warrant being a start. I would start Goff over pretty much all of these guys that I've been talking about streaming quarterbacks. So Jared Goff has proven that with the offensive line and the weapons that he has, that he can put up decent fantasy numbers, despite this Carolina defense being somewhat good. Swift and Williams, I mean, it's just, this has been kind of, the back and forth affair all season, right? I mean, I lean Swift right now while healthy in a half point or full point PPR base format, just because the dude had 9 targets last week. He only ended up putting up like 7 fantasy points, which is crazy for a guy that gets 9 targets. But when you're getting 9 targets, I mean, you should automatically be starting Williams. If it's a standard league, he just has more opportunities to run the football. And in the red zone, sometimes I think they do lean Williams a little bit more because the red zone is where players can get banged up and Swift is very, very injury prone. So that's why, I mean, if you're in those types of formats, that's the way I would lean. But to me, it's absolute coin flip which guy's going to do well on what week. Amon-Ra St. Brown, he's a stud. You play him. No questions asked there. But I think Detroit on the road here in Carolina, again, against the Jets, they did enough to win the game. They were on the road. It was Goff on the road against a tough defense. He proved himself. It wasn't an amazing game for him, but they got the dub. So right now, to me, there's really no reason to doubt Detroit. I think we can put that in our rear view, and I think they're going to play hard. I don't know that the results mean that they're automatically going to win, but this is going to be a close game, but I still lean Detroit just because, to me, they have more to play for.
All right, next up we have Atlanta Falcons at Baltimore facing the Ravens. Baltimore is favored by 6.5 points. Over under is at 35.5. Another win factor game. 15 miles per hour winds are expected in this game. On the Falcons side, I don't like anybody to start for me. Algier did have a strong game last week, but Baltimore has given up the 5th fewest fantasy points per game to running backs over the last 5 games. I don't like Cordell Patterson. I think they're both in the RB3 discussions for fantasy this week. And Drake London is playing against Marlon Humphrey, who's allowing a passer rating of 67.6 passer rating. So for that reason, I don't like anybody from the Falcons. And correct me if I'm wrong there, but yeah, I would just fade the Falcons as far as fantasy-wise this week.
Yeah. And Desmond Ritter's starting. So it's a rookie quarterback on the road in a hostile environment, really bad weather. They're going to try to lean on the run game, but the Ravens do a great job of shutting the run game down.
Right.
Ravens defense is a beautiful start this week.
Right. Absolutely. And then for the Ravens side, no Lamar, like we talked about earlier. Tyler Huntley is going to get the start, but probably not on your fantasy roster. I think Tyler Huntley hasn't proved anything for me to warrant a start. I know we talked about he could do it on his legs, but he's not really doing that. The offense is not looking as efficient, and with the wide receiver situation, looks like they're going more into running the ball with J.K. Dobbins. So for that reason, I would start J.K. Dobbins this week as I did last week as well. But yeah, I think that the Ravens are favored by 6.5. They're the better team here. They should come out with a win against the Falcons at home.
Yeah, and again, we're talking so much about kickers, but I think it's important this week. I don't think I'm going to start Justin Tucker. Again, I think 15-mile-an-hour winds. The Ravens have had struggles moving the ball. I mean, they're starting Sammy Watkins. They just picked him up this week, and he's being put on the field just because they have nobody to throw the football to, right? So, the movement of the football is the struggle. Like, I think they'll be able to run the football effectively. They can probably get into field goal range, but I see a lot of if it's 4th and 3 or 4, or shorter, they're going to probably go for it because in this wind, I just don't expect kicking to succeed. So call me crazy. I know maybe it's reactionary because Tucker didn't have a great game last week, and he's the best kicker of all time. So maybe he adjusted. Maybe he spent all week studying how wind affects his kicks, and he's probably going to perfect that this week and drop 20 points. But again, wind worries me for kickers, and it's crazy how big of a difference you can see in your lineup when the last player, your kicker, has a double-digit performance versus when they put up like 3. Like they can be such a nice compliment to the rest of your
Oh yeah.
squad. When you see like 10 plus there, you're like, wow, like that's incredible, right? My defense, my kicker, and my tight end, those last 3 slots, when you see double digits there, like it's the best thing ever. But last week when I saw Tucker put up 3, it was one of the worst things ever for me. Like I don't want that. So I'm going to try to stay away from that. I'm going to try to stay away from all these games that have shitty weather. Again, there's enough games that don't have shitty weather. Like if you do the math, there's probably like 3 games, which is what, 6 teams. And so there's probably kickers on free agency that are not going to play in shitty weather that you could try to start. But call me crazy, but I am going to bench Justin Tucker this week. The San Francisco 49ers, a place where the weather is not bad. It is going to be nice. It's one of the, I think it's like the warmest game this week at like 55 degrees in San Francisco. They're hosting the Commanders. They're favored by 7 points, over under sitting at 37.5. I mentioned it earlier. San Francisco is chasing the number 2 seed, the Minnesota Vikings, and the Washington right now is currently holding on to the 7th spot. It's a tough matchup because the Commanders run the football well, but San Francisco is a great defense at stopping pretty much everything. I mean, they're I think they're only allowing like 72 yards a game on the ground. Now, granted, a lot of their games have been they do a good job of going up. They do a good job of controlling the clock, and they force the other team to be in passing situations. So that's why there's not a lot of running success against them. But I think the Commanders, if they can continue that volume, if they can get a couple of first downs, I don't think it's impossible to run against this defense. So I think there is a world where Brian Robinson can still be appealing and can still be startable this week. And I think you probably will start him just because of the sheer volume. Terry McLaurin, obviously, as long as Heineke is the quarterback, it's hard not to start that guy just because the upside is there. And I love Dotson. I think he's got an incredibly bright future, but I still don't think you can start a touchdown dependent rookie with Taylor Heineke as your quarterback, especially against the 49ers defense. So I don't love him there. On the other side, I mean, Commanders defense is coming to life. They're getting Chase Young back. I don't like the matchup for Brock Purdy. So if you can stream like Daniel Jones, I take him over Purdy this week, especially with no Debo as well. CMC, obviously he's a play. It's crazy that dude didn't make the Pro Bowl. Asinine actually, but he is an automatic start. And Brandon Ayuk, man, I've been struggling with him. The volume has been there. He becomes kind of their primary pass catcher when Debo's not there, or even when Debo's there. He's the guy that they actually throw the football to. But the last 2 weeks, only 3 targets and 2 targets. So there is a weird trend that I don't feel comfortable about. But with that being said, if you have to start him, like again, he's a wide receiver 2 in a lot of people's rosters. It's hard to bench that guy, right, in the playoffs. So I don't fault you if you start him, but I don't like the matchup. It's not appealing. I personally think the Kittle matchup is a lot more appealing at the tight end spot. So between Ayuk and Kittle, I see Kittle having a better day there. But the 49ers, in my opinion, I think this is going to be a close game. I think the Commanders' pass rush against Brock Purdy is going to be the difference. I think if they can do enough to disrupt him, because a lot of what the 49ers do is they make life easy for your quarterback, right? First read, throw it there. First read, throw it there. Exactly what you're going to do pre-snap, but the pass rush is the one thing that can fuck all that up. So if you see, Josh Sweat and Chase Young getting after Purdy, then this could be a long game for the 49ers offense. This could be a low scoring affair. I think the Commanders could do a good job of staying within striking distance. And sometimes all it takes is some Heineke magic, late game Heineke magic to pull off the upset. So to me, this game is going to be a little bit closer than the spread dictates, in my opinion.
Yeah, we haven't seen Brock Purdy being taken down just quite yet. And he's been winning us when he's starting. So it's going to be interesting to see if the Commanders can do that.
Yep.
All right. Battle of the NFC East. The Eagles face the Dallas Cowboys in Dallas. Dallas is favored by 5 points here, over under at 46.5. And the big thing here, Jalen Hurts is not going to get the start. So for the Eagles side, that worries me a little bit as far as fantasy goes. But you're probably still going to start these guys. Miles Sanders, you'll start him as the RB1 for the Eagles. They can run the ball well, and they have a great offensive line. So even against the Cowboys, I like Miles Sanders. AJ Brown, Devontae Smith, Dallas Goedert, the wide receivers and tight ends here. These guys have been well. AJ Brown and Smith have been the studs on the team and studs on your fantasy team as well. And with Gardner Minshew as the quarterback, there's definitely a lot of uncertainties there, but I think that I would still roll the dice. These are the guys that got you into the playoffs. How do you not start them now?
And
Um,
you could do a lot worse than Minshew. Like, I think Minshew is a more than capable backup. I
mhm,
think he's still going to know how to utilize his players, his offensive weapons. I think that the knock on Minshew is not necessarily his decision making, but just his lack of, like, the throwing arm, the arm strength is not quite there for an NFL level quarterback. But I've always liked the way he plays. He's actually a pretty decent, like, elusive scrambler. It's unorthodox. It's not like he's got the build for it, but he does a good job of doing a lot of that. So he was a guy that I also toyed with as a possible streaming replacement. And I think a lot of people in the world are actually plugging him right in that have Jalen Hurts. Now, it is the Cowboys defense, so that is obviously your primary concern. But I don't think Minshew is a terrible play here. And I think, like you said, you're right. You don't bench these weapons, these amazing weapons, just
right.
because it's Gardner Minshew.
Yeah, and Cowboys defense is good. They get touchdowns, they get the turnovers, but they still, allowed a decent amount of points and yards. So that I don't really see the Cowboys defense hindering the guys that you start on your team. Certainly, they can, in the game, they can definitely score touchdowns, and that's just the Cowboys defense getting points.
Yep.
But yeah, Minshew mania was a thing, right? Was that last year?
Yep. Yeah.
So
DS, was it last year or 2 years ago? I forget.
yeah,
It all
well,
just blends together when you get old.
right? Well, Minshew Mania can come back, and hopefully that helps all of the Asia Brown and Devontae Smith and Goddard owners as well. On the Cowboys side, Dak Prescott is going to probably get the start for you here, along with Pollard and Zeke. One of the things that the Eagles, maybe, their running rush defense hasn't been so good, but it doesn't matter. That's not what matters here. Pollard and Zeke are the focal point of that offense as far as the Cowboys like to run the ball, so you're still going to go ahead and start them. And, CD Lamb is the wide receiver one there, so I do like that. I like it as far as the fact that he's a wide receiver one. That's why I would get the start, but I wouldn't start any other Cowboys receivers. Like, for example, Michael Gallup, Noah Brown against this Eagles defense. They worry me, and they do not get an automatic start. But Dalton Schultz is a guy. He's been decent, and except for last game where he only had like 2 fantasy points. With the whole tight end situation, he's probably still going to get the start. I mean, if you're between Dalton Schultz and, like, I don't know, Greg Dulcich, you're probably still going with Dalton Schultz
Yeah.
because Dulcich isn't a surefire hit either. So, well, yeah, that's where we're at with the Eagles and Cowboys.
Yeah, tight end, and that's where we're at with the tight end position, as
Yeah.
as where we've been pretty much all season. Let's take it to Saturday Night Football. Haven't heard that one in quite a while. The Raiders are traveling to Pittsburgh to take on the Steelers. And in Pittsburgh, they're playing in the Northeast. What does that mean? There is going to be wind. 15 plus mile an hour winds. Pittsburgh favored at home, 2.5 points, over under 38.5. Both teams need to win out, and they need help to make the playoffs. They're still not out of it, believe it or not even the Steelers. So win out and get some help, and playoffs are still not out of the question. Kenny Pickett is back. The reason that's even worth mentioning is I think Kenny Pickett being back helps Pat Fryermuth a ton. He's been his go-to guy all season. And last week when Mitch started, Fryermuth didn't see a single target. So I did not start him, got the goose egg this week. I'm going to plug him right back in. Do you think I should do that, Shovit? Or if you're me, do you try to pivot away from Fryermuth, just knowing that he got 0 targets last week? Granted, it was Trubisky.
Yeah, I think that whole Trubisky fact plays a big role in this. I think that when you have Kenny Pickett on the field, he's really good at going through his progressions. And I think that with that being said, Fryermuth should get more than 0 targets. So I like Fryermuth. Who are your other options if you don't start Fryermuth?
I mean, I do still have the option to start Evan Ingram tonight. So in like 25 minutes, I could throw in Evan Ingram. There is wind there as well, but man, Trevor Lawrence has started to love Evan Ingram. So he's tight end 4 on the season. His target share is kind of wild. And, with the uptick in Lawrence, all of his weapons are like becoming the benefactor. So it almost makes Evan Ingram like Like, you kind of have to start him. The only reason I'm not starting him is the weather, but it's kind of stupid that I'm doing that because this game also has bad weather and I'm still throwing in Fryermuth in my lineup. So I do have the option to start Evan Ingram. And I mean, there's some guys like if you really want me to get desperate, I have, Juwan Johnson is a free agent, but that's the game in Cleveland with like 25-mile-an-hour winds. So I don't really want to mess with that. Dolchich is there in free agency. And then it gets really deep. Like, do I want to go with like Higbee, McBride, or Okonkwo with Malik Willis at the helm? Probably not.
Yeah, I mean, just for the fact that it's a bounce back game, you won't see Muth getting less than like 3 targets in a back to back game,
That
especially with
that's
Kenny
the
Pickett.
thing. You have to think that like one of the focal points of the offense, seeing 0 targets, was a point of emphasis that was talked about this week in practice. It's like, okay, let's try to get the guy that's been, our safety valve and the guy that helps us move the chains, the football, not getting a single touch. Let's try to get him involved again. And again, like you said, Kenny Pickett's been his guy. Like, they have that connection. So I think that's really what I'm banking on.
Yep, that's fair.
Najee Harris, obviously, in this matchup with the wind, running the football is going to be something that both teams try to establish and do. So he's an automatic start right here. Pass catchers with the wind for the Steelers. Shishot talked about it. It looks like he's deploying Pickens. I don't feel great about Pickens or Deontay Johnson, to be completely honest with you. But I don't know. I mean, Deontay Johnson sometimes gets 10 catches, and Pickens sometimes gets those deep balls. But it seems like it's like every other week, it's either one guy getting a ton of volume, or it's either Deontay Johnson catching 10 balls for 70 yards, or Pickens catching like a deep bomb or some kind of spectacular catch. So I haven't seen enough consistency to feel great about starting either one of those guys.
I like Deontay Johnson in this game, especially if the wind is a factor, because he is getting,
He's
not the
more underneath
long
routes.
underneath routes, like the quick slants and things like that. So for the volume's sake, I do like Deontay Johnson over Pickens this week. Yeah.
Yeah. That makes sense. And obviously on the Raiders side, Josh Jacobs, phenomenal year. You start him. Devontae Adams, despite the win, gets an amazing matchup in the Steelers secondary. And Darren Waller showed signs of life last week, catching that touchdown. He is officially back. And again, it's a tight end conundrum in fantasy football this year. So I don't hate just throwing Waller into your lineup if you had him and you picked him up or you stashed him in your IR all season. But because of the situation at tight end, Waller's upside's really, really high. Steelers' pass defense is not ideal, so I don't hate throwing Waller into that matchup. Honestly, this is another one of those matchups, Shovit, where I'm like, if it's kind of even, I always give the advantage to Mike Tomlin. So give me Pittsburgh at home.
Yeah, I mean, I'm actually kind of surprised that the Steelers are favored, but
The line is weird, right? The line is kind of sus, but that's the Raiders. That's how much lack of faith. The Raiders won on a stupid ass lateral last week, so they shouldn't even won. And they've only won like 4 or 5 games all year. They're not a good football team, despite like having Josh Jacobs leading the league and having Devontae Adams be a superstar. Like, I think those two guys really paint an incorrect picture of what the Raiders actually are.
yeah, agreed. All right, next up, the first game of Sunday, we've got the Packers at Miami facing the Dolphins. Miami is favored by 4 points. Over under is 50 points in this game. On the Packers side, who are you going to start? I think you're going to start Aaron Jones and AJ Dillon. Those two guys have been the best, starts for you as far as from the Packers team. Those two guys are continuing to play well this year. So I think Jones and Dillon definitely get the start. And then on the receiving side, out of all the receivers, I think Christian Watson should get the start. He didn't have the best game last week. I think he only had like 6 points. But moving forward, I think that Christian Watson warrants a start more than any of the other guys on this team. And Aaron Rodgers, he may be a streamable start, but only if you really need to. Like, Jalen Hurts is hurt and you don't have anybody else, then maybe you start A-Rod, but he's definitely a guy that you want to shy away from. I mean, I even like
The
Tom Brady.
matchup's nice. I mean, the matchup's nice though, right? Miami's secondary, their pass defense has not been great. I mean, they score a lot of points, but what we talk about their Achilles heel is their offense puts up a lot of points because their defense gives up a lot of points.
Mhm.
So it's not the worst matchup considering the fact that it's in Miami where the weather's not terrible. There's a lot of these quarterbacks that have been hurt recently, and some of the quarterbacks who aren't hurt are playing in monsoon or snowstorms or like
Right.
windstorms.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. With that being said, yeah, I mean, A-Rod, I still think that maybe Tom Brady is going to be a better start than Aaron Rodgers this week, but I think that's like, like, I don't
Couple of
know,
points. I think it's a
12 or
couple
13.
point different, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So on the Dolphins side, you're going to go ahead and start Tua. He's the the QB the the QB of the guy you want to start for sure for this matchup as well. You're not going to bench Tua at this point. Raheem Mostert, I think, is going to get the start. So with Jeff Wilson injured, he is in a favorable matchup against the Packers sus run defense. So he definitely could have a solid week this week against the Packers. Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle is wide receiver 12 in fantasy with a 22.2 target share this year. So those two guys, you're definitely still starting them on the Dolphins team. But yeah, I mean, it should be a fun game. Packers and Dolphins, and both teams still are in the playoff. They still have a chance to get into the playoffs. A lot of good things. Packers need to win out, I believe, and then a lot of
And
other
get help. Yeah.
and definitely get help, but they can certainly do it. And Dolphins are right in the mix as well, so it should be an interesting matchup.
Yeah, I mean, Dolphins fortunately control their own destiny. They're currently the 7th seed, right? So as long as they take care of business and win out, they're going to make the playoffs. The Packers, like you said, have to win out and then have to get a ton of help in front of them. I agree with you on the Christian Watson thing, right? He started off the game slow, but what you notice is there is like Aaron Rodgers poking fun at Christian Watson post game is good news for Christian Watson owners. It means that they are trying to build that chemistry, right? It means that like he sees the upside potential for a guy with that type of speed. And even like when he was struggling or when he wasn't getting targets, they actually ran plays designed for Christian Watson. And that's always a good sign when you have a fantasy player, right? They're not like the fourth read, in a broken play, catching a deep pass. And you're like, yes, I lucked
Right.
out. They're running plays and designing plays for this guy because of his speed. So you're absolutely right. I mean, if there's one receiver on that team you want to start, it's definitely Watson. So that is what greets you for Christmas morning when you're opening your presents. Once you're done opening your presents and you just want to relax and watch a great football game on Christmas Day, well, the NFL gives you a lump of coal because the Denver Broncos are traveling to the Rams, and it is going to be a shit show of a matchup. I mean, just think about what the schedule makers thought this game was going to be when the season, like before the season started. Christmas Day, peak Christmas time. We're going to have Russ and the Broncos against Matthew Stafford and the defending champ Rams. Well, now Russ and the Broncos, who are not in the playoffs, they're already eliminated from the playoffs. And the Rams, the defending champs, also already eliminated from the playoffs. So not a lot to play for here. So you can actually spend some time with your family if you don't really want to catch this game. Denver's favored by 2.5 points, over under 36.5. Russ is going to be back from injury, so he's going to play. It's a small sample size, but the game against the Chiefs in which he got hurt, he started to come to life, looked a lot better. Is there some sort of building that's going on there? I guess we will see. Latavius Murray has been really, really good for the Broncos. Why are we surprised? So he continues to get volume and he continues to run the football effectively, finds the end zone. I think you start him. He's been good. Jerry Jeudy's value increases with Russ, and he's been the receiver that they've gone to even when Russ hasn't been there. So if you're starting a pass catcher, it's obviously Jeudy. The Dulcich roller coaster, ride it if you want to, but I'm personally not riding that. And on the Rams side, again, not a lot to talk about. You're really not going to start anybody. If you're desperate, Cam Akers, he's gotten volume, but it's just not a great matchup against Denver. So I don't love anybody on the Rams this week at all.
Yeah, should be an interesting game. Russ is a godly man, and it's Christmas Day, so you can expect maybe a Christmas
Yeah.
miracle and
Come to
some Russ.
Jesus moment.
Jesus,
Like angels in the outfield. It's going to be Jesus on the football field inside of Russell Wilson.
oh man, that would be iconic. All right, Sunday night football, Bucs at Cardinals. The Buccaneers are favored by 7.5 points. Over under is at 40.5. Tom Brady for the Buccaneers is a borderline quarterback one this week. Arizona is 24th in success rate per drop back, so they're just not a great pass defense team. So I think that for that reason, Tom Brady and with his weapons out there should be able to get you some fantasy points if you are running into the situation where you don't have enough, if you don't have good quarterback depth and your Jalen Hurts is injured, like I mentioned earlier. He's a good start here. Fournette and White, what do you want to do with those? I think you get a coin, you flip the coin, and you pick which one you want to start. You definitely want to not start these guys if you can, but if you have to, I still like Fournette for the fact that he can get you those rushing touchdowns at when they get into the red zone. I could see them trying to utilize Fournette. I think that White would be a guy that gets the volume. But really, it's 50-50 at this point. So pick your poison there. I like Godwin as a start for the Buccaneers. He's been the sure guy that can produce, give you fantasy points on a consistent basis. Outside of Evans, outside of Julio Jones, this Godwin's the guy you want to start on the team. And then Evans, he's third in deep targets, but 19th in the red zone targets. And as a matter of fact, Brady has only targeted Evans 2 times inside the 20 in the last 5 games. Like he's just
That's
not
so
even.
wild.
I
Why?
know this guy's like what 6'4", like 6'6", something
Yeah,
like
he's
that, right?
6'5" or something like that. Yeah, he's huge, and he's the only big guy on their team. Like, why are you
I
not throwing him lobs?
I don't get it. But yeah, Evans is just not seeing. Maybe it's some injuries. I don't know what it is, but Evans is not seeing the target. So, just using that stat, you're probably not going to start Evans. And then Russell Gage was really good last week. Had a great fantasy week. However, that was when Julio Jones was not active. So if Julio Jones is active, I think that you don't start Russell Gage if that is the case. On the Cardinals side, so Tracy McSorley is getting the start for the Cardinals.
Trace, yeah, Trace.
Tracy. I saw the EY at
Yeah.
the end. I said Tracy. That would have been, yeah, yeah. Anyways, Trace McSorley is getting the start for the Cardinals. So that's not a guy you want to start in your fantasy team. So just don't even worry about that. But that is definitely going to affect your DeAndre Hopkins. He's definitely a start because he's a volume based receiver, but he's definitely felt the effects of not having Kyler Murray as the quarterback as far as his fantasy production goes. But you're probably still going to go ahead and start him. And then the other guy from the Cardinals you'll start is James Conner. He's going to be the guy that you can count on with all the injuries and the lackluster play from the Cardinals. James Conner is the guy that is getting carries, is getting touchdowns. So you continue to start James Conner.
Yeah, I like that, and I think this is a great matchup. If I'm higher on Brady this week too against the Cardinals, which means Godwin's been the volume guy, but I could see a bounce back game from Mike Evans. I think this is if there's a week where he doesn't have a touchdown catch since like week 4 or 5 or some stupid number like that, and he's been a guy his whole career that's caught 10+ touchdowns. I think this is a game that we could see Mike Evans get in the end zone. Let's end the rundown with Monday Night Football. The San Diego, should I call them the LA Chargers? Sorry, living in the past there. Traveling to Indianapolis to take on the Colts. The Chargers are favored by 4.5 points, over under 45.5. The Chargers are on the cusp of clinching a playoff berth. I think they're currently sitting as the 6th seed at 8-6. They have the tiebreaker over the Miami Dolphins, who are also at 8-6. So I think one more win and a loss for Miami, and I think the Chargers officially clinch. So they are right there. The Chargers side, it's a great matchup. I mean, you saw what the Vikings offense did against this Colts defense. Herbert, Eckler, Allen, Williams, start them all. On the Colts side, Matt Ryan, after having given up the biggest comeback in the history of the Super Bowl, he goes on to give the biggest comeback in the history of the NFL, in the history of the sport ever. And what happens? He gets benched. They are starting Nick Foles this week. This is the second time Matt Ryan's been benched this year. What a shit show that's been. Nick Foles gets to start, man. Nick Foles is the wild card. He is the guy that I can sit here and tell you all things about Nick Foles, and then he'll go out on the field and do something that none of us have ever seen. That's how they won that Super Bowl. So I have no idea what to expect from this offense. The things that we know, there's no Jonathan Taylor. Zach Moss got a shitload of carries last week, but I think that was more a game script situation where they were winning the game by a lot, and he's the primary running back. But I still like Deion Jackson. I think he's got way more upside. He's more explosive. He catches passes, and I think they're going to run the ball with him a little bit more. So give me Deion Jackson. It's in a spot start if you're desperate. He's a pretty decent play here over Zach Moss, in my opinion. And it's Nick Foles. I don't know what receiver is going to be thriving with him on the field. If I have to guess, I'm still going to stick with Michael Pittman Jr. He's the wide receiver one. He's been the guy. He's the guy that I think, when you're a new quarterback or when you're a quarterback that comes onto the field, you're always going to try to go to the guy that is the most proven. And to me, Michael Pittman Jr. is the most proven. So if I'm starting between him, Campbell, Pierce, I'm still starting Michael Pittman. Right now, you're not starting Alec Pierce after a goose egg. It's just not in the realm of possibility. Paris Campbell, I think you're shying away from as well because the volume that was once there is no longer there. So right now, Deion Jackson and Michael Pittman Jr., if you're desperate on that side. But for the Chargers, it's a full send, man. I think the Chargers are going to have a big game. I think they win this game. I think they cover the spread, and I think they clinch the playoffs.
Man, wasn't Nick Foles like some crazy fantasy stat where he had like so many touchdowns in a fantasy week or something, like 7
He
touchdowns.
threw for 7 touchdowns 1 week, yes.
Yeah, man,
He has a 7 touchdown passing game. Yes,
that's
that's
the
it. Nick
same Nick
Foles does
Foles.
have that.
Nick Foles,
Yeah,
who
it's the
also
same Nick Foles. Yep,
won the Super Bowl with the Eagles
yep,
as well with
yep,
when Wentz was hurt. So yeah,
yep.
you never know. Big wild card there.
Dude, big wild card there. That is it for the rundown show of it. Let's end the episode by giving out our matchups of the week. My matchup of the week, I'm not going to make it obvious. It's like Derrick Henry, 200 yards, 2 touchdowns, but that is the most obvious matchup of the week you could possibly have. So my matchup of the week is Daniel Jones, Danny Dimes, going against Minnesota defense, 26th against opposing quarterbacks in fantasy points. The 4 running quarterbacks that Minnesota's faced this year, Jalen Hurts, Justin Fields, Kyler Murray, and Josh Allen, all have averaged about 56 rushing yards a game. Pair that with the fact that Minnesota's defense gives up nearly 300 passing yards a game. I think Daniel Jones is in a great spot here to have a decent fantasy matchup game. If again, it's a week where you're desperate, you lost Hurts, you've lost Lamar in the past, you've lost Kyler Murray, or you have a quarterback that's going to be affected by a snowstorm. Daniel Jones, if he's on your free agency or if he's a guy you can start, I love the matchup this week. Give me Daniel Jones as my matchup of the week.
Nice. That's a good one because Daniel Jones is probably in the waivers or free agency and
Yep.
can be picked up. My guy is, yeah, he's probably not a guy that you can pick up in the waivers, but I think he's definitely going to have a solid game. Raheem Mostert versus the Green Bay Packers, who are giving up the 4th most rushing yards per game. I think that given that Jeff Wilson is not going to play most likely, and I believe there's some win factor there as well. So with all that being said, I think Mostert is in a nice position to have really good running back numbers fantasy-wise this week.
Yeah, it's a great matchup. Packers' run defense has been atrocious. Jeff Wilson is still hobbled. So, I mean, again, even if he's back, he's still going to be limited a little bit. Mostert's got a very advantageous matchup. And they force feed, man. Last week, they force fed this guy the football. So, in a better running matchup, why not continue to feed him the rock? So, I love that. I absolutely love that. The sad thing is, I have Mostert in my other league, but he's on my bench because I can't start him over Henry. I can't start him
Wow.
over Saquon, and I can't start him over Pollard. So, he just rots on my
Yeah,
bench.
he's just going to
But
chill.
but the good thing is he doesn't get to start for anybody else. So fuck everybody else. That is the episode. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. This is going to be a wild fantasy weekend and wild weekend for football. Hope you guys enjoy it all. Hopefully the weather does not impact your fantasy performance or your team's performance too dramatically. But hopefully your team wins. Hopefully your fantasy team wins, and hopefully you win a boatload of money. Sweet card, that's Shove It. We're the only playbook, guys. Have a fantastic weekend. Have a Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy Kwanzaa, Happy non-denominational holiday, whatever the hell you celebrate. Hopefully it's fantastic. We'll see you guys next week.